Story 1. The call came in just after 10 p.m., the kind of hour where the night has fully settled, but the city hasn't gone quiet yet. There's still movement, still noise, still people out doing whatever it is they do when the sun goes down. For us, it was just another dispatch. The radio cracked to life with that familiar static and a voice that sounded routine, almost bored. Unit respond to a reported assault. Nothing about it stood out. We'd been on plenty of those. Fights, arguments that got out of hand, someone with a busted lip or a broken nose. Sometimes worse, sure, but most of the time it was manageable, predictable even. The address, though, that part registered. It was in one of those neighborhoods you didn't linger in longer than you had to. Not because something always happened, but because something could. The kind of place where tension sits just beneath the surface, where people keep to themselves, and where, when things do go wrong, they tend to go very wrong. Still, it was just an assault call. We rolled out without urgency, lights off, moving through the streets with that steady, practiced calm that comes from doing this long enough. My partner didn't say much. Neither did I. You don't really need to. You both know the routine, the expectations. We pulled up a few minutes later. The first thing I noticed was the police. 2 cruisers already on scene, lights flashing red and blue across the row of parked cars lining the street. The reflections bounced off windshields and windows, creating this disorienting pattern of light that made everything feel slightly unreal. There was a man standing on the sidewalk, behind the cars, yelling. His voice hit me before anything else. High-pitched, strained. Not just loud, but wrong somehow, like it didn't quite belong to him. Is he gonna be okay? Please, someone tell me he's gonna be okay. The words came out in this warbling tone, breaking apart mid-sentence, like his voice couldn't decide what it was supposed to sound like. 2 officers stood near him, trying to calm him down. Sir, we need you to relax. Take a breath, okay? He didn't seem to hear them. Or if he did, it wasn't getting through. We grabbed the gurney and moved in. At first glance, it all lined up with what we expected. Guy yelling. Cops trying to control the situation. We assumed he was the patient, that he'd been assaulted. Maybe in shock, maybe injured in a way we couldn't see yet. It wouldn't have been the first time. We approached him cautiously, pushing the gurney around the row of parked cars to get closer. Hey, I called out. We're here to help, all right? Are you hurt? He didn't answer the question, just kept yelling. Is he gonna be okay? Please. There was something off about the way he said it. The wording, the urgency. It didn't sound like someone asking about themselves. It sounded like someone asking about someone else. And that's when we came around the car. Everything shifted in that instant. The world narrowed, focused, because there he was, leaning against a Mini Cooper, slouched in the gutter. At first, for a split second, my brain didn't process it. It tried to fit what I was seeing into something normal, something fixable. He looked like he was sitting, like he had just collapsed there and was catching his breath. His head was tilted slightly forward, his eyes open, looking straight ahead. And for about 2 seconds, I thought he was alive, that he was looking at me, that he was aware. Then something in his eyes didn't line up. They weren't focusing. They weren't reacting. They were just there, staring through me, not at me, through me. And in that same instant, it clicked. He wasn't alive. He hadn't been for a while. The realization hit hard and fast, snapping everything into clarity. His skin had that tone, that unmistakable tone you learn to recognize. The stillness, the absence of anything resembling life. And then I saw the rest. He was shirtless. His body, his chest, his abdomen. There's no clean way to describe it. It wasn't a simple stab wound, not 1 or 2 clean penetrations. It was torn, ripped open in places where skin should have been intact, Multiple wounds, deep and jagged, like whoever had done this hadn't just wanted to stab him. They had wanted to destroy him. Blood had pooled beneath him, soaked into the gutter, trailing out across the pavement. It was everywhere. The smell hit next. Metallic, thick, fresh enough to linger in the air. I felt that familiar shift in my body, the one that happens when training takes over and emotion gets pushed aside. All right, I said, more to myself than anyone. Let's go. We moved fast, checking for anything that could indicate life. A pulse, breathing, a response. Nothing. But you don't stop there. You never stop there. We started CPR. Right there in the street, hands pressing down on a chest that no longer responded the way it should. Air pushed into lungs that didn't fight back. The motions automatic, rehearsed, mechanical. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I already knew. There was no saving him. Not with those injuries. Not with the time that had passed. But you do it anyway. Because that's the job. Because you don't get to decide when it's over. We loaded him onto the gurney. Lifted, secured, moved. The man on the sidewalk was still there. Still yelling. Still crying. Is he gonna be okay? Please, tell me he's gonna be okay. I glanced at him briefly as we passed. His face was twisted in panic. His eyes wide, wet, desperate. Sir, we're doing everything we can, my partner said. It was the standard line. The only line. We got him into the ambulance. Doors shut. Lights on. And we moved. Inside, it was just us and him. The world outside reduced to flashing lights and muffled sirens. We kept working. CPR. Airway. Everything we were trained to do. But the longer it went on, the more obvious it became. There was no coming back from this. By the time we reached the hospital, it was a formality. We handed him over, gave the report, stepped back as the doctors took over, though we all knew where it was going. It didn't take long. They pronounced him, just like that, a life reduced to a statement, the time of death, a line on a chart. We stepped out of the room, the adrenaline starting to wear off, leaving behind that strange, hollow feeling that always comes after something like that. You don't feel it right away. It comes in pieces, fragments, the image of his eyes, the wounds, the voice of the man on the sidewalk. Is he gonna be okay? A couple of officers came in not long after, same ones from the scene. They needed to go over details, standard procedure. We started talking through what we saw, what we did, the timeline as best as we could, piece it together. That's when one of them said it, casually, like it was just another piece of information. At first we thought it was a random attack, he said. Roommate said the victim went outside for a smoke, claimed he came out later and found him like that. I nodded slightly. It made sense, on the surface. But then he continued. After you guys left, we noticed something, he said. Something in his tone shifted. Not dramatic, just enough to make me pay closer attention. There was a blood trail, he said, from inside the house, all the way to where you found him. I felt something tighten in my chest. That doesn't line up, my partner said. No, the officer agreed. It doesn't. There was a pause. Then, when we confronted the roommate about it, he said, he ran. I blinked. Ran? Straight into the house, the officer said. Barricaded himself inside. The room felt quieter. He continued. SWAT's on the way. They're dealing with it now. And just like that, everything shifted again. The scene replayed in my head. The man on the sidewalk. The one yelling. The one asking if his roommate would be okay. The one standing right there, just a few feet away, while we worked. While we tried to save the man he had most likely killed. His voice, high-pitched, unsteady, desperate. Is he gonna be okay? I remembered the way he looked at us, the way he hovered, the way he never once actually approached the body, never once tried to touch him, just stood there, watching, asking, waiting. And I realized he hadn't been asking out of concern. He had been asking out of something else, something darker, something I couldn't quite put into words, but I could feel it now, crawling under my skin. Because the truth was, the person who had done that, the person who had torn that man apart, had been right there, within arm's reach, close enough to hear his voice, close enough to see his face, close enough that if things had gone differently, if something had set him off, we might have been next. That's the part that stays with you. Not the blood, not the injuries, not even the death. It's the realization, the moment when you understand how close you were to something you didn't even recognize at the time. How you stood there, focused on saving a life that was already gone, while the one who took it stood behind you, watching. Story 2. My grandfather knew his forest the way some people know their own homes. Not just the paths and the clearings, not just the borders marked on old maps, or the places where the trees thinned and the light came through differently, but the living details, the way bark should feel under your hand, the color a leaf should be in late summer, the subtle shift in a tree's posture when something wasn't right beneath the surface. He didn't just own those woods, he understood them. Every week without fail, he drove through them. Same routine, same roads, same quiet ritual of checking, observing, listening. He had an old vehicle he trusted more than anything modern, something that could handle the uneven forest tracks and didn't complain about mud or narrow turns. He'd pack a thermos, sometimes a sandwich, and disappear into the trees for hours. He liked it that way. Out there wasn't much noise, no traffic, no crowds, no interruptions. Just the wind moving through branches, the occasional crack of a twig under unseen weight, and the steady hum of the engine as he moved from one section to another. This was in Bavaria years ago, decades really, when things were quieter in a different way. Hitchhikers were still common then, even in rural areas. People stood by roads or trails with nothing but a bag and a thumb out, trusting that someone would stop. And my grandfather always did. It didn't matter who they were. Young, old, men, women, it made no difference to him. If he saw someone standing alone on a road that stretched miles in either direction, he'd pull over. It wasn't something he thought about. It was just what you did. He never told a story like he was proud of that habit. It wasn't about that. It was just normal to him, helping someone get from one place to another, until the day it wasn't. It started like any other. A gray morning, cool but not cold. The kind of day where the sky sits low and heavy, pressing the light down into something dull and flat. The forest would have been quiet, the colors muted, the air carrying that faint scent of damp earth and wood. He took his usual route, down the main path first, checking the outer sections, before heading deeper into the narrower trails that cut between denser clusters of trees. The tires rolled over gravel and dirt, the sound familiar, steady. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. He noticed things as he always did. A tree that needed attention, a patch of ground that looked too soft, a branch that had fallen where it shouldn't have. Small details, the kind most people would overlook. Time passed. Hours, maybe. And then, he saw him. The hitchhiker stood off to the side of one of the forest roads. Not the main one, not the kind that led directly to town, but one of the smaller paths that connected different sections of the woods. The kind of place where you didn't expect to see someone unless they had a reason to be there. That was the first thing that registered. Not alarm, just curiosity. The man stood still. No bag, no visible belongings. Just standing there, slightly off the road, as if he had been waiting. My grandfather slowed the car instinctively. This was the moment that had played out dozens, maybe hundreds of times before. See someone, slow down, stop, open the window, offer a ride. Simple, automatic. Except this time, something didn't sit right. He couldn't explain it. Not then, not later. There was no clear reason. The man didn't look obviously dangerous. He wasn't acting aggressively. He wasn't waving his arms or stepping into the road. He was just there. And yet, as my grandfather approached, a feeling crept in. Quiet, subtle, but insistent. A sense that something was off. The man turned his head slightly as the car got closer. Their eyes met. And in that instant, my grandfather didn't see a person who needed help. He saw something else. Something he couldn't define. But something that made his hands tighten on the steering wheel. The car slowed further, almost to a stop. This was the moment. The point where he would normally pull over. Where the window would go down. Where the routine would play out exactly as it always had. But it didn't. Instead, he kept going. Not fast. Not abruptly. Just enough to pass the man without stopping. The hitchhiker didn't move. Didn't call out. Didn't react in any visible way. He just watched the car go by. And then, he was gone from view, swallowed by the trees behind. My grandfather drove on. At first he questioned it. The decision felt wrong in its own way. It went against habit, against instinct. The usual instinct anyway. The one that told him to help, to stop, to offer. But there was another instinct. Quieter, deeper. The one that had spoken up just long enough to change his mind. He didn't turn around. Didn't second guess himself enough to go back. He just continued his route, finishing what he had set out to do. The forest remained the same, silent, unchanged. But something about the day felt different after that. He went home later than usual, parked the car, stepped inside, and did what he always did, turned on the radio. It was background noise more than anything. News, weather, whatever happened to be playing. Something to fill the quiet. He wasn't paying full attention at first, not until certain words caught his ear. Authorities are searching for previously convicted, violent offender. He turned the volume up slightly. A man believed to be responsible for a murder earlier today. Something in his chest tightened. The incident occurred in a wooded area. The room felt smaller. The suspect is thought to be attempting to flee. A description followed. Height, build, clothing, details that painted a picture. A picture he recognized. The words seemed to echo in his head as they came. Last seen attempting to hitchhike. That was the moment. The exact moment it all connected. The road. The man. Standing there. Waiting. No bag. No destination. Just waiting for someone to stop. My grandfather didn't move. Didn't speak. He just stood there listening as the report continued. Each word reinforcing what he already knew. The man he had seen, the man he had almost picked up, had just killed someone, somewhere in those woods, not far from where he had been driving, not far from where he had stopped, or almost stopped. The realization settled slowly. Heavy, unavoidable. If he had followed his usual routine, if he had done what he had always done, that man would have been in his car, sitting beside him. In that enclosed space, miles from anything, surrounded by trees that swallowed sound and light alike, there would have been nowhere to go, no one to call, no one to hear, just the two of them, and whatever that man was capable of. He sat down eventually, not because he wanted to, but because his legs felt unsteady. The radio continued in the background, repeating information, updating details as they came in. But he didn't need to hear more. He already knew enough. The forest had felt different that day, not in any obvious way, but in that subtle, underlying sense that something wasn't right. And for the first time in his life, he had listened to it. That quiet voice, that instinct he couldn't explain. The one that told him, without reason, without evidence, not this one, not today. He never forgot that. Not the man, not the moment, not the feeling. Because it wasn't fear that stopped him. It wasn't logic. It was something else. Something deeper. Something that, for once, overrode everything he thought he knew about people. And years later, even just telling the story, you could see it in his expression. That flicker of something. Not panic. Not even shock. Just the lingering weight of what could have happened. Of how close he had come to letting the wrong person into his car on a quiet road in the middle of a forest where no one would have heard him if something had gone wrong. Story 3. When I first moved into that apartment, it felt like I'd gotten lucky. A friend of mine had bought the place, fixed it up completely, and was trying to sell it. New paint, new fixtures, clean floors. Everything had that fresh, untouched feel that most rentals never have. But the market wasn't great at the time, and after a few months of no buyers, he offered to let me stay there until it sold. It was supposed to be temporary. A few months maybe. Nothing about it felt off at first. The building itself was older, sure, but solid, quiet mostly. The kind of place where people kept to themselves. You'd hear the occasional footsteps through the walls, maybe a door closing somewhere down the hall, but nothing out of the ordinary. For the first couple of days, everything was fine. Then I started noticing her. The woman next door. At first it was just noise. Late at night. Not loud at first. Just a voice, muffled through the wall like someone talking on the phone. I didn't think much of it. People stay up late, people talk. But it didn't stop. Midnight turned into 1 a.m. Then 2, then 3, and the voice kept going. Not steady, not conversational. It rose and fell in strange patterns. Sometimes it sounded like she was arguing, other times like she was pleading. And sometimes, this was the part that stuck, it sounded like she was talking to someone who wasn't answering. I told myself it was just thin walls, that maybe she had the radio on, that it wasn't my business. Until it started getting louder. Not gradually, just suddenly. One night, it felt like the wall between us didn't exist at all. Her voice came through clear enough that I could make out words. Jesus sees you. Pause. They're watching. Another pause. You can't hide from them. Then laughter. Not normal laughter. Something sharper. Uneven. I sat there in bed, staring at the wall, trying to convince myself it was just a radio. But radios don't pause like that. They don't respond to silence. And they don't sound like they're right on the other side of the wall, moving. It went on for hours. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. Sleep wasn't happening. My head was pounding, my nerves were shot, and whatever patience I had left was gone. So I did the one thing I probably shouldn't have done. I went next door. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where your own footsteps feel louder than they should. I knocked. Once. Twice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, movement. Slow. Deliberate. The door opened just a crack. And she was there. She looked older than she probably was. Mid-40s maybe. But her face had that worn, stretched look that made it hard to tell. Her eyes were the worst part. Wide, unfocused, like they were trying to look at too many things at once. Yeah, she said. Her voice was calmer than the one I'd been hearing through the wall. Hey, I said, trying to keep it neutral. I was wondering if you could keep it down a bit at night. The noise, it's been a little loud. She didn't respond right away, just stared at me. And in that moment, I noticed what was behind her. The door had opened just enough to give me a glimpse inside. The walls, they were covered. Crosses, dozens of them. Painted, drawn, scratched into the surface. Different colors, different sizes, and words. Jesus, angels, repent. Over and over again, scrawled in uneven, jagged handwriting that covered nearly every visible surface. The windows, they were black, painted over completely, blocking out any light. The room itself looked wrong, damp. Yellow-stained carpet that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. Trash, movement on the floor, cockroaches scattering in the dim light. And the smell, I didn't fully register it then, but it was there. Something sour, rotting. There was no dog, but there was dog shit everywhere. She said nothing, just stared. Then she shut the door, hard. And a second later, the volume inside went up, louder than before, like she was making a point. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, the sound of her voice bleeding through it again. Then I turned and went back to my apartment. That night was worse, much worse. I barely slept. And when I did, it was shallow, broken, the kind where you never fully relax. The next night, my girlfriend stayed over. I didn't tell her everything, just that the neighbor was a bit weird. We went to bed late. The noise next door had died down a little, or maybe I was just too tired to notice. At some point in the night, I woke up. No reason, no sound, just that sudden awareness, like something had pulled me out of sleep. The room was dark, quiet. For a second, I thought everything was fine. Then I saw it, a shape, standing next to the bed. At first, my brain tried to explain it away. A shadow, a trick of the light, something I was imagining because I was half asleep. I blinked, tried to focus. The shape didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I could feel it, that presence, that awareness. And then it spoke. You should lock your door at night. The voice was quiet, clear, too clear. My entire body went cold. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't in my head. It was her. I could see it now. The outline of her face, the way she stood, just slightly hunched. Something in her hand catching the faintest bit of light. She had been standing there, in my room, watching us sleep. For how long? I didn't move. I couldn't. Every instinct was screaming, but my body refused to respond. She stayed there for another second. 2. Then she turned, walked out, just like that. No rush, no hesitation, like she had every right to be there. The door clicked softly as it closed, and she was gone. I didn't sleep at all after that. Didn't even move. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over in my head. Morning came slowly, too slowly. When the light finally started to creep through the windows, it felt like a release, like I could breathe again. Then I heard it, outside, below my bedroom window. A voice, muttering, low, unintelligible. I forced myself to get up, walked over, looked down. She was there, standing in the small strip of ground below, talking to herself, or something. Her words didn't make sense. They weren't even words, really. Just sounds. Broken syllables strung together in a rhythm that didn't belong to any language I knew. In her hand, a plastic bag. It moved slightly as she shifted her grip. And that's when the smell hit. Even from up there. Strong, rotting, sickly sweet. I looked closer and saw it. Inside the bag, a dog, or what was left of one. Its body stiff, discolored, decomposing in the heat. My stomach turned. I stepped back from the window, my mind racing, trying to process everything at once. This wasn't just weird. This wasn't just uncomfortable. This was dangerous. I left my apartment, went upstairs, knocked on another door. A guy answered. He looked just as tired as I felt. "What's going on with her?" I asked. His expression changed immediately. "You've had issues too?" he said. I nodded. He let out a breath, shaking his head. "She broke into my place," he said. My stomach dropped. "When?" "A few weeks ago," he said. "I was watching TV with my kids. Got up to get something from the kitchen." He paused. "And she was behind the couch." The image hit me instantly. The same way she had stood next to my bed, watching, holding something. "She had a power drill," he said quietly. And just like that, I knew what she had been holding the night before. The realization made my skin crawl. I didn't wait any longer. I called the cops. They knew her immediately. Didn't even need an explanation. "Yeah," one of them said. "We're familiar." "She's dangerous," I said. "She broke into my apartment. She was standing in my room." They nodded. "We know," he said. "She's off her meds." "So do something," I snapped. They exchanged a look. "We can't just go in," he said. "She owns the place. Unless she's outside or actively harming someone, our options are limited." The frustration hit hard. "She's breaking into apartments," I said. "No signs of forced entry," he replied. "No theft, hard to prove." It didn't make sense. It didn't feel right. But that was it. That was all they could do. So I waited. 2 days. Barely sleeping. Barely leaving. Listening for every sound next door. Every movement. Every shift. Waiting for her to go outside. Because that was the only chance. The second night, around 2 a.m., I heard her door open. Footsteps. Fading. I didn't hesitate. I called. "They're here," I said. "Now." The response was immediate. Faster than I expected. Within minutes, sirens. Lights. 3 police cars. A van. They moved in quickly, efficiently. No hesitation this time. No waiting. They found her on the road, heading toward the convenience store. Cigarettes, probably. They restrained her. She didn't fight much. Didn't scream. Just went. Like it didn't matter. Like none of it mattered. They put her in the van, closed the doors, and drove away. And just like that, she was gone. The building was silent after that. Too silent. Like something had been removed that left a gap behind. I never saw her again. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still wake up. And for a split second, I expect to see her there, standing beside the bed, watching, waiting, and reminding me that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't what someone does. It's how quietly they can do it, without you ever knowing they were there. Story 1. The river spot wasn't something you found on a map. You had to know someone who knew someone, or just be the kind of person who wandered far enough off the road to stumble into it by accident. A dirt path cut through the trees, narrow and uneven, with tire tracks hardened into the ground from years of people driving out there when the weather allowed it. If you followed it long enough, the trees would thin just a little, and you'd hear it before you saw it. The steady rush of water moving over rocks, constant and low. That's how you knew you were close. The clearing itself opened up around a bend, a small stretch of exposed earth leading down to the riverbank. There was always evidence of other people being there. Burnt patches where fires had been lit, empty bottles half buried in the dirt, the occasional piece of rope tied to the thick branch of a tree that leaned out over the water. The rope swing was the main attraction. It hung over a deeper section of the river, where the current slowed just enough that you wouldn't get dragged immediately downstream. People would grab it, run, swing out as far as they could, and let go, dropping into the water with a splash and a shout. It was stupid, a little dangerous, but that was part of the appeal. We'd been there plenty of times. It was one of those places you went when you didn't want to be seen. No neighbors to complain, no cops driving by, no one to tell you to leave. Just trees, water, and whatever you brought with you. That night felt like any other. There were a handful of us, maybe 8 or 9, scattered around the clearing. Someone had a speaker going, music low enough that it didn't drown out the sound of the river, but loud enough to fill the quiet spaces between conversations. A fire burned near the edge of the clearing, throwing flickering light across faces and trees, casting long, shifting shadows that moved whenever the flames did. People laughed, talked, drank. Normal. Easy. It was late, but not so late that anyone was thinking about leaving. The kind of night that felt like it could stretch on for hours without changing. I remember standing near the edge of the clearing, looking out toward the darker part of the woods where the firelight didn't quite reach. There's always that line, you know? That invisible boundary where the light stops and the darkness begins. Everything on our side of it felt familiar, controlled. Everything beyond it didn't. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular when I noticed the movement. At first it was just a shift, a shape where there hadn't been one before, something breaking the stillness of the trees. Then he stepped into the light. He didn't come in fast or aggressive. He just appeared, like he'd been standing just out of sight the entire time, waiting for the right moment to move forward. He was older than us. Not old, but older. Maybe late 30s, early 40s. Hard to tell exactly. His clothes were worn, not dirty exactly, but used. Like someone who spent more time outside than in. His hair was messy, his face rough, lined in a way that suggested he hadn't had an easy life. He didn't look surprised to see us. Didn't hesitate. He just walked closer, stopping a few feet beyond the outer edge of the group where the firelight hit him fully. No one said anything at first. The music kept playing. The river kept moving. And he just stood there, looking at us. One of the guys, Tyler, finally broke the silence. Can we help you? The man tilted his head slightly, like he was considering the question. Then he spoke. You gotta watch yourself down here. His voice was low, steady, with a slight slur that hinted at alcohol, but not enough to make him incoherent. A few people exchanged glances. What? Someone asked. He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he took a slow step closer, his eyes moving over the group one by one. There are some bad folks around here, he said. Something about the way he said it made the air shift. Not dramatically, just enough that the easy feeling from before started to thin out. Tyler frowned. Okay, who are you? The man smiled. Not wide, not friendly, just enough to show he'd heard the question. I'm nobody, he said. That didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. There's something unsettling about someone who refuses to define themselves. It strips away context, leaves you with nothing to place them in. No category, no role. Just a person standing there saying things that don't quite make sense. All right, Tyler said, his tone sharper now. Well, nobody, we're good. You can head out. The man didn't move, didn't react, just kept looking at us. You gotta be careful, he repeated. People come out here thinking it's nothing, thinking it's just a good time. His gaze shifted toward the rope swing, barely visible in the darkness beyond the firelight. That thing, he said, nodding slightly in its direction. You don't know what's been done to it. A few people laughed, uneasy. Dude, what are you talking about? Someone said. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked back at us, his expression unchanged. Just watch yourselves, he said. There was a pause, a long one. Then Tyler stepped forward slightly, his patience gone. All right, man, seriously, you need to leave. For a second, it looked like the man might argue, or refuse, or say something else strange and unsettling. But instead, he shrugged, a small, almost indifferent movement. Then he turned, and walked back into the woods. No rush, no hesitation. Just disappeared into the darkness the same way he had come. Gone. Just like that. For a moment, no one spoke. The music still played, but it felt out of place now. The fire crackled. The river moved. But something had shifted. Creepy, someone muttered. Yeah, another said. What the hell was that about? Tyler shook his head, trying to brush it off. Just some drunk guy. Probably lives out here or something. That seemed like the easiest explanation. And people wanted an easy explanation. So that's what we went with. Within a few minutes, the conversation started up again. The tension faded, replaced by forced normalcy. Someone turned the music up a little louder. Someone else cracked a joke. The night continued, but not quite the same. Every now and then, someone would glance toward the woods, just to check, just to make sure he wasn't still there, watching. A couple days later, everything changed. It wasn't at night. It wasn't during a party. It was in broad daylight. A different group had gone out to the river. Not all of us, just some people we knew. It was supposed to be the same thing. Hanging out, swimming, using the rope swing. Normal. Until it wasn't. She went off the swing like everyone else had done 100 times before. Grab the rope. Run. Swing out. Let go. Drop into the water. Except this time, something was wrong. She came up screaming. Not the kind of scream you let out when the water is cold or you hit wrong. A real scream. Sharp. Panicked. Pain. At first, no one understood what had happened. They thought maybe she hit a rock or twisted something. Then the water around her started turning red. They pulled her out. And that's when they saw it. Fishing hooks. Dozens of them. Embedded along the bottom of the swing's landing area, tied to lines, hidden just below the surface. When she dropped in, they tore into her leg. Deep. Ripping chunks of flesh as she tried to pull away. The kind of thing you don't accidentally set up. The kind of thing someone has to plan. The kind of thing someone has to want. She was taken to the hospital. It was bad. Really bad. And suddenly that guy from the woods, the one who said to be careful, didn't feel so random anymore. We found out later who he was. Just some guy who lived nearby. Known in the area. A bit off. A bit drunk most of the time. Creepy, yeah, but harmless. At least that's what people said. And the things he had been warning about, they weren't him. They were real. Up the road, further into the woods, there was a family. Not the kind you saw in town. Not the kind that mixed with people. They kept to themselves, lived off the grid. And there were stories. Whispers, mostly. About fights. About strange behavior. About things people didn't want to look into too closely. For a while, nothing else happened. Life moved on. The river spot wasn't used as much after that, but it didn't disappear completely. People still went, just more cautiously, more aware. The memory of that night faded, like things do when enough time passes. Until 5 years later. That's when it all came back. Not as a story, not as a warning, but as something real. They beat a kid nearly to death. With a log, left him broken in the woods. And a girl, they took her at gunpoint, forced her into a vehicle, drove her around like she was nothing, like it was a game. She survived, barely. And when it came out who did it, it was them, the family from up the road, the ones no one talked about, the ones that man had tried to warn us about. Suddenly everything made sense. The way he stood there, the things he said, the way he looked at the rope swing. He knew. He had seen something, or heard something, or lived close enough to understand what was out there. And he had tried, in the only way he knew how, to tell us. We just didn't listen. Because he didn't look like someone worth listening to. Because it was easier to laugh it off. because nothing bad had happened yet. I still think about that night sometimes, about how close we were to something we didn't understand, about how easily things could have been worse, and about that man standing at the edge of the firelight, telling us to be careful, while we stood there thinking we were safe. Because the truth is, we weren't. We never were. We just didn't know it yet. Story 2. It was one of those heavy summer days where the air feels thick enough to hold on to. The kind that presses down on you, makes every step slower, every breath warmer than it should be. Even the trees in the park seemed still, like they had given up trying to move in the heat. I used to walk my dog there all the time. The park stretched long along the edge of the Thames River, winding trails cutting through patches of trees and open grass. On one side, it felt like nature, quiet, green, almost peaceful. On the other side, it backed up against houses. Not small ones either. Bigger homes with fenced-in yards, decks, sheds, all facing away from the street and toward the park like they wanted the privacy, but still needed the space. It was an odd mix, civilization and isolation pressed together. That day, it was quiet. Too quiet maybe, though I didn't think that at the time. My dog was slowing down more than usual, tongue hanging out, panting hard. The heat was getting to him. I could feel it too, the way the sun seemed to stick to your skin. "All right," I muttered, glancing toward the slope that led down to the river. "Let's get you some water." We'd done it before. There was a small path worn into the dirt where people and animals had gone down to the edge. Not official, not maintained, but easy enough to navigate if you knew where to step. We moved off the main trail, pushing through a small gap in the brush and starting down the incline. The ground was dry near the top, but closer to the water it softened, damp and uneven underfoot. At the bottom the air changed slightly, cooler, just a little, with the smell of water and mud and something organic that always lingered near the riverbanks. My dog didn't hesitate. He went straight to the edge, lowering his head and drinking greedily. I stood a few feet back, letting him do his thing, looking around without really focusing on anything. That's when I noticed how close we were to one of the houses. A tall privacy fence ran along the edge of the yard, wooden boards packed tight with no gaps between them. It loomed just a short distance from where we stood, separating the backyard from the riverbank like a wall. It felt close. Closer than I usually like to be near someone's property. I remember thinking we'd just stay a minute and head back up. That's when I heard it. A sharp, rhythmic banging. Metal against something solid. It echoed strangely in the still air, louder than it should have been for something happening on the other side of a fence. Hammering. That was my first thought. Someone building something. A shed, maybe. Or fixing something up. It wasn't unusual. People did work in their yards all the time. I didn't think much of it. My dog kept drinking. The sound continued. Bang, bang, bang. Steady, forceful. Then, it stopped. Just like that. No fade. No slowdown. Just silence. And in that silence, a voice. "Shut up. Nobody knows you're here." The words cut through the air so cleanly it felt like everything around me froze. For a second, I didn't even process what I had heard. My brain tried to make it something else. A joke, a TV, someone talking on the phone. But there was something about the tone, sharp, angry, controlled. It didn't fit any of those things. Before I could even fully react, the hammering started again. Bang, bang, bang. Louder now. Faster. Like it was trying to cover something. That's when the fear hit. Not gradually. All at once. A cold, sinking feeling that dropped straight into my stomach and spread outward. My dog lifted his head, ears twitching slightly, sensing the shift in me more than the sound itself. "Come on," I said quickly, my voice lower than usual. He didn't need much encouragement. I tugged gently on his leash and turned toward the slope. The climb up felt steeper than it had on the way down. My footing slipped once on the damp ground, my hand catching against the dirt to steady myself. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. The hammering continued behind me, relentless, as if it was following. We reached the top of the bank, pushing back through the brush and onto the main trail. The moment my feet hit the flat ground, I didn't stop. I kept walking, faster than normal, my dog keeping pace beside me. I could feel my heart beating harder now, my ears picking up every sound around me, every rustle of leaves, every distant noise amplified. The trail curved slightly, bringing me parallel to the row of houses. And then, I was right beside it. That house. The one with the fence. The one where the voice had come from. The hammering had stopped again. The silence felt worse this time. He came out of the gate. It opened with a soft creak, the latch clicking as it swung inward. And he stepped out onto the path that led from the backyard to the front of the house. For a moment, he didn't see me. He was focused on what he was doing, pushing a wheelbarrow, old, rusty, the metal chipped and worn, the wheel making a faint grinding noise as it rolled. Then he looked up and saw me. Everything stopped. He froze mid-step, one hand still gripping the handle of the wheelbarrow. His eyes locked onto mine. He was wearing fatigues. Not clean, not pressed, not official looking. Just worn, faded. Like they had been used for years. His face was hard to read. Not because it was hidden, but because there was so little expression there. Just stillness, awareness, recognition. I didn't stop walking, but I slowed, just slightly, because I couldn't help it. Because something about the way he was looking at me made it impossible not to notice. He set the wheelbarrow down. Slowly, deliberately. The metal scraped softly against the ground. And then, he just stood there, watching, not saying anything, not moving, just staring. I followed his line of sight briefly, my eyes flicking past him toward the front of the house. That's when I saw them. 2 vans, parked side by side in the driveway. Plain, boxy. The kind of vans you don't remember after you've seen them. The kind that blend in. The kind people joke about. Kidnapping vans. At the time, it felt like a cliche. But standing there with him watching me, with that house behind him, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like something else entirely. I looked back at him. He hadn't moved. Hadn't blinked. Hadn't broken eye contact. The world around us felt distant, muted. Like everything had narrowed down to just that moment. Just that look. Just that silent exchange. My grip tightened slightly on the leash. "Come on," I muttered to my dog, more to myself than anything else. And I kept walking, step by step. Not running, not turning around, just moving forward. His gaze followed me. I could feel it, like something physical pressing against my back. Every instinct in my body was screaming to get away. Faster. Now. But I forced myself to stay steady, to not give him anything, to not show fear. The path stretched ahead, longer than it had ever felt before. Each step measured, each second dragging. And still, I could feel him watching. It wasn't until I reached the bend in the trail, where the trees thickened just enough to block the view of the house, that I finally broke into a faster pace. Almost a run. My heart pounding now, adrenaline flooding through me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if he was still there. Or worse, if he wasn't. I didn't slow down until I was out of the park entirely. Until the houses gave way to streets. Until there were people again. Cars, noise, normal life. Even then, the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me all the way home. A weight in my chest, a question in my mind. What did I hear? What was happening behind that fence? Who was he talking to? or about. Shut up. Nobody knows you're here. The words replayed over and over. I called the police as soon as I got inside. My hands were still shaking slightly as I explained what had happened. The dispatcher asked questions, calm, methodical, trying to piece together something from what I could tell them. The location, the description, the house, the man, the vans. I answered everything I could, but there were gaps, things I didn't know, things I couldn't explain. They said they'd check it out. That was it. No immediate urgency in their voice. No confirmation of anything. Just procedure. I hung up and waited for something. A call back. News. Anything. Nothing came. Days passed. Then weeks. Life moved on. But the memory didn't. It stayed sharp. Clear. Unsettling. Because there was no ending, no explanation, no confirmation of what I had heard, or imagined, or almost witnessed. Just that moment, that voice, that man, standing there in the heat, staring at me like he was deciding something, and the feeling that if I had stayed just a little longer, or reacted just a little differently, I might have found out exactly what was happening behind that fence. And that is something I'm not sure I would have walked away from. Story 3. Out where we live, night came differently. It didn't creep in slowly under streetlights or fade behind the hum of traffic. It just arrived. One moment there was the last trace of dust sitting low over the fields, and the next it was swallowed whole by darkness so complete it felt like the world beyond your porch simply stopped existing. Our house sat alone, surrounded by open land and a thin line of trees in the distance. No close neighbors, no passing cars, unless someone was deliberately coming down our road. The kind of place where you noticed every sound because there were so few of them to begin with. That's why the knock stood out. It was around 9 o'clock at night. Not late by most standards, but out there it might as well have been midnight. People didn't just show up unannounced, especially not after dark. If someone came by, you usually knew ahead of time. There were no accidents, no casual drop-ins. So when the knock came, it didn't feel normal. It wasn't hesitant either. It was firm, deliberate. 3 sharp hits against the door. I remember looking up immediately, my body reacting before my mind caught up. My mom was in the other room, and I called out to her without thinking. Someone's at the door. She came out, already frowning slightly. She had heard it too. Who would be here? She muttered, more to herself than to me. Neither of us had an answer. She moved toward the door slowly, not scared exactly, but cautious. That's just how you are when you live somewhere like that. You don't assume danger, but you don't ignore the possibility either. The porch light flicked on, casting a dull yellow glow over the front yard. She opened the door. A man stood there. At first glance, he didn't look threatening. That's the part that always sticks with me. He looked normal. Mid-30s maybe. Average height, clean enough. Dressed like someone trying to look presentable but not formal. The kind of person you wouldn't think twice about if you saw them during the day in a store or walking down the street. But this wasn't a store, and it wasn't daytime. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. My mom didn't step outside. She stayed just inside the doorway, one hand still on the frame. "Can I help you?" she asked. He smiled. "I'm just in the area introducing a new business," he said. "We specialize in American-made household products. I was wondering if you had a moment." There was something rehearsed about it. Not robotic, but too clean. Like he had said those exact words 100 times before. My mom didn't relax. "We're not interested," she said, polite but firm. Most people would leave at that point. He didn't. "That's all right," he said quickly, holding up a hand slightly. "No obligation. I just wanted to give you a free sample, something to try." He reached back toward the driveway. That's when I noticed the van. It had been there the whole time, parked just far enough from the porch that it blended into the darkness beyond the light. A minivan. Plain. Nothing distinctive about it. He opened the side door. The interior light flickered on, and that's when everything changed. There were people inside, more than one. Shapes at first, then clearer. 5 men, sitting, watching, not talking, not moving, just there. The light caught their faces in fragments. Eyes, shadows, expressions that didn't quite read from that distance but didn't feel right. My mom saw them too. I could tell by the way her posture shifted, subtly. Her shoulders tensed. Her voice changed when she spoke again. "Take your sample and leave," she said. He either didn't notice the change or he ignored it. Instead, he reached into the van and pulled something out. A container. White. Plastic. He walked back up the steps and handed it to her. "Just a little something," he said. "No strings attached." She took it. I think out of instinct. Or maybe just to end the interaction faster. Up close, I could see it clearly now. A Clorox container. Or at least something that looked like one. Clean. Too clean. No label peeling. No wear. It didn't feel like a sample. It felt like a prop. "Thanks," she said, though there was no warmth in it. He smiled again. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "I've got something else you might like," he said, turning slightly back toward the van. "A vacuum cleaner, high quality. Let me grab it." And he started walking back. My mom didn't follow. She stood there holding the container, watching him. And I watched her. Because something in her expression had changed completely. Not confusion, not annoyance. Something sharper. Awareness. She turned her head slightly toward me without taking her eyes off him. "Go get your phone," she said quietly. We didn't have a landline. If anything happened, that phone was the only way to call for help. I didn't ask questions. I just moved. Fast. Down the hallway. Into my room. Except, it wasn't where it should have been. I checked the desk. The bed. The floor. Nothing. My heart started pounding harder. The urgency rising fast now. Where the hell was it? I checked again. And again. Nothing. A sound from the front of the house made me freeze. The van door. Closing. Voices. Low. Too low to make out words. I stopped searching and grabbed the next thing I could think of. My knife. It wasn't big. It wasn't anything special, but it was something. I held it tight, my hands slightly shaking, and moved back toward the front of the house. I didn't go all the way to the door. I stopped just around the corner, where I could hear but not be seen. My mom was still there, standing in the doorway. The man was closer now. Too close. "I just need a minute," he was saying. "Won't take long." "No," she said, louder this time. There was no politeness left in her voice. "Get off my property." There was a pause, a shift in the air. And then she threw the container. Hard. It hit the ground outside, rolling slightly across the porch. "I said leave," she snapped. "Now, or I'm calling the cops." Silence. Heavy. Thick. The kind that feels like something is about to happen. I tightened my grip on the knife, my breath shallow now, my ears straining for any movement. The man didn't respond immediately. And in that moment, I realized something. He hadn't acted alone. He had come up to the door alone, but he hadn't been alone. Not for a second. The van was still there. The others were still inside, waiting, watching. For what? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. Footsteps. Retreating. The man stepped back off the porch. No argument. No anger. Just compliance. But it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a decision. He turned, walked back to the van. The door slid open. Shadows shifted inside. He climbed in. And then The engine roared to life. Too loud. Too sudden. The tires spun against the gravel as they peeled out of the driveway, the sound echoing into the night as the van disappeared down the road. Gone. Just like that. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The silence that followed felt unreal, like the house was holding its breath. I stepped out from the corner slowly, the knife still in my hand. My mom was still standing in the doorway, staring out into the darkness where the van had been. "Mom," I said quietly. She didn't answer right away. Then she turned to me, and I saw it. Fear. Real fear. Not panic. Not hysteria. But something deeper. Something that said she understood exactly how bad that could have been. "Lock the door," she said. I did. Every lock. Every window. We didn't sleep much that night. Every sound outside felt louder. Every shadow felt closer. And the questions, they didn't stop. What did they want? Why our house? What was in that container? What would have happened if she had stepped outside? If she had let him go back to the van and bring whatever he claimed he had? If I had found my phone faster or slower? We never saw them again. No van, no man, nothing. No explanation, no closure. Just that night, that knock, and the understanding that out there, in the middle of nowhere, where you think you're safest, you're also the most alone. And sometimes, that's exactly what someone is counting on.